So here's the setup. While Trump was throwing himself a massive 80th birthday bash, a UFC fight card on the White House South Lawn, complete with aerial displays and a 7-fight card, all under the cover of celebrating America's 250th anniversary, across town in New York, a very different kind of show was happening. At Town Hall, Jane Fonda and the Committee for the First Amendment were hosting the Rise Up, Sing Out concert, a celebration of free speech. And the headliner of the night? Robert De Niro, two-time Oscar winner, walking out to roast the president on his own birthday. De Niro starts by poking fun at the whole spectacle, welcoming attendees to the protest event held at New York's Town Hall. Then he gets into his thesis. He claimed he was devoted to protecting the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment, and not just the convenient parts. Quote, all parts of it, not just the free speech part. That said, I'm pretty close to being a free speech absolutist. Even for speech I don't like, and there's plenty of that around. So, when I hear something I don't like, I use my own free speech to respond. And that's where things get good. De Niro gives the crowd a real-world example of how he uses his free speech. He brings up something Trump said just days earlier, that he doesn't think about Americans' financial situation, not even a little bit. And De Niro's response? 2 words. Well, 3 if you count the curse properly. Shut the F*** K up. The crowd erupts. And here's the layer that makes this genius. Old-school movie fans immediately caught the reference. It's a callback to the famous 2 words moment from his 1988 classic, Midnight Run. De Niro basically turned a 38-year-old movie line into a 2026 political mic drop. He didn't stop there either. He brought up Trump's recent comment, "I love the inflation," and let the crowd fill in the blank for what he thought about that. Then De Niro pivots from jokes to something heavier. He talks about how the phrase, "we all love our country," got stuck in his throat at a similar event last October, because, in his words, our country isn't so lovable right now. And then comes the line that's all over social media right now, comparing loving the country under Trump to an abused spouse saying they love their abuser. He then runs through a list of grievances. Wars, he says, are stupid and inhumane, healthcare being stripped from millions while, in his words, enriching what he called the Trump-Epstein class, and masked militias he claims are being sent to shoot citizens in the streets, torture our neighbors, and separate families. It builds to this final gut punch: I can't love a country that's led by a racist, misogynist, xenophobic tyrant. And let me just say it, I can't love the country that's led by Donald Trump and his sycophant Congress. Now, if you're thinking, wow, De Niro really doesn't like this guy, you're not wrong, and this isn't new. Rewind to 2018, De Niro stood on stage at the Tony Awards and dropped an F-bomb directly at Trump, getting a standing ovation while CBS censors scrambled to bleep him out in real time. He's called Trump an idiot, a madman, and a liar at various points over the years. Earlier this year he attended a No King's Day protest in New York. And just last fall, a clip of him going off on Trump, including calling him, quote, an alien, went viral. So this birthday roast? It's basically chapter 47 in an ongoing saga. At the end of the day, 2 very different birthday parties happened in New York this weekend. One had a UFC octagon on the White House lawn. The other had Robert De Niro doing his best impression of an angry uncle at Thanksgiving. Except this uncle has 2 Oscars and apparently still remembers his lines from Midnight Run. Let me know in the comments, was this De Niro's most savage Trump takedown yet, or has he topped himself before? So here's the setup. Sunday night, June 14, 2026, Donald Trump's 80th birthday, the White House South Lawn hosted something that's never happened before, a full UFC event, called UFC Freedom 250, officially billed as a celebration of America's 250th anniversary. A full-scale UFC octagon was built right on the South Lawn, and 14 fighters from around the world competed inside a wire mesh cage in front of an estimated 4,300 attendees, including about 1,200 active duty service members. Now here's the part everyone's talking about, the walkout. With the traditional, "Hail to the Chief," announcing his arrival, Trump walked onto the South Lawn alongside his longtime ally and UFC CEO Dana White. And get this, the two walked side by side through the actual Oval Office before heading outside. Trump came out of the Oval Office around 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and depending which outlet you ask, it was either a stately presidential entrance or, and I'm quoting Variety here, slowly ambling out of the White House toward the Claw, an 80-foot-tall tarantula-like canopy hovering over the octagon. White was smiling through the walk. Trump kept a stoic look. Classic split-screen energy. Even the announcer got in on it, welcoming the crowd with, "Here is the President of the United States of America, Donald J. Trump," like he was the next fighter on the card. Okay, but the production value here is genuinely insane for a sporting event. The night kicked off with the Marine Band performing the national anthem, sung by Zac Brown, and the Armed Forces Joint Chorus joined in too, with a military jet flyover happening near the end of the anthem. Then to close out the night, there was a flyover by the Navy's Blue Angels, and earlier in the evening, U.S. Air Force Thunderbirds F-16s and the Blue Angels performed a flyover visible from the National Mall. Variety also pointed out something wild in the pre-show. Memorable UFC fights were projected onto the Lincoln Memorial reflecting pool and monuments around D.C., including a clip of Conor McGregor raising his gloves against the Washington Monument. As for the crowd, people greeted Trump with loud cheers, and the occasional, "Happy Birthday," got shouted out from the stands. On the balcony before he even walked out, someone yelled, "Happy Birthday," which got a round of applause. The crowd broke out into "USA" chants multiple times throughout the night, most notably during Justin Gaethje's big win over the previously undefeated Ilia Topuria. And the guest list? More than 4,000 spectators including Trump officials, VIPs, and yes, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg was there. Vice President J.D. Vance and House Speaker Mike Johnson were also in attendance. Dana White summed up the night by telling the crowd President Trump is a fighter, calling him the toughest and most resilient person he's known. UFC fighters don't normally walk out through a backstage hallway, but this time, they walked through the actual White House, and for the main event, through the Oval Office itself, to get to the cage. Instead of a DJ, they were walked out to live music from the president's own Marine Band. Then there's heavyweight fighter Josh Hokett. After his fight, he beat Derek Lewis, gifted Trump a medallion, and then grabbed the mic to shout, "Michelle Obama is a man. Am I right, America?" To cheers from the crowd, definitely one of the stranger moments of the night. And one more detail that raised eyebrows, Trump reportedly bought between $15,000 and $50,000 in stock of TKO Holding Group, the UFC's parent company, just weeks after the Freedom 250 lineup was announced. Meanwhile, ads for Trump Coins, Truth Social, and World Liberty Financial served as event sponsors during the broadcast. Even getting to this point wasn't smooth. The card got pushed back about an hour due to weather, with organizers placing a large open-air canopy over the octagon, and earlier in the day, UFC middleweight champion Sean Strickland was led away by a U.S. Marshal at the Fan Fest near the White House. So look, love it or hate it, this is officially one of the strangest crossovers in modern American history. A sitting president's 80th birthday, an MMA cage on the South Lawn, fighters walking through the Oval Office, and the Blue Angels closing the show. Let me know in the comments, is this peak American spectacle, or peak something else entirely? Drop your reactions below, and subscribe for more breakdowns of the moments everyone's talking about. Two leaders started a war together. Now the US and Iran just agreed to end it, and Israel's prime minister is privately furious. One senior Israeli official called the deal terrible for Israel. So what happens when Trump and Netanyahu's interests stop lining up? Let's break it down. For months, Trump and Netanyahu were on the same page, a joint war against Iran that Netanyahu bet would topple Iran's clerical rulers and bolster his own position ahead of elections back home. But here's the problem, Israel's longest-serving prime minister is now on a collision course with Trump, as the US president tries to extricate himself from the war, and both men's original goals remain unmet. As of today, June 15, 2026, the US and Iran have reportedly agreed to halt the fighting. And behind closed doors in Jerusalem, that news is landing very differently than the public statements suggest. Let's start with how Israel is actually reacting, because publicly it's calm. But privately, it's a different story. Israeli officials have been cautious in public, for fear of angering their most important ally, who's known for being prickly toward critics. But in private conversations, the frustration is clear. One senior Israeli official put it bluntly: the preliminary agreement is terrible for Israel, and there is no one in the Israeli leadership who views it otherwise, from the Prime Minister to the Chief of Staff. And the timing matters here. Netanyahu is facing autumn elections he's projected to lose, which may make him more willing to defy Trump, especially as Israeli polling shows growing public skepticism about the US president's commitment to Israel's security. Dan Shapiro, a former US ambassador to Israel now at the Atlantic Council, summed up the moment: this is a pretty stark moment of divergence of interests. He expects Netanyahu won't openly oppose the deal to avoid a brawl with Trump, but will signal that Israel reserves its rights and isn't bound by it. AL Monitor. The actual memorandum of understanding between the US and Iran is expected to be signed Friday in Switzerland, so we're talking about a very live, very fast-moving situation. So how did two allies who started a war together end up here? PBS lays it out well. Trump was seeking a quick win, similar to what he achieved in Venezuela, while Netanyahu wanted to fully vanquish Iran and its proxies. PBS. And there's a domestic pressure angle for Netanyahu too. Anger has grown in Israel over his failure to secure a lasting victory in the wars that followed Hamas's October 7, 2023 attack. More than 2 years later, Hamas still controls part of Gaza, Hezbollah is still firing rockets, and Iran's government and nuclear program remain intact despite heavy losses. Lebanon is actually the flashpoint right now. The collision course runs through Lebanon, where fighting between Israel and Hezbollah continues despite ceasefire announcements. Iran wants Lebanon included in any broader regional truce, a demand Trump appears to have accepted to get the deal done. Iran, for its part, has threatened to attack Israel again if Israeli strikes on Lebanon continue. And Al Jazeera's reporting captures the political math perfectly: the war with Iran is deeply unpopular in the US. So Trump needs a deal to end it, while Netanyahu could actually benefit politically at home if the conflict continued. Two leaders, two completely different incentives. Now here's where it gets really blunt, because Trump hasn't exactly been diplomatic about this behind the scenes. When asked by the Financial Times whether Netanyahu would approve a peace agreement with Iran, Trump didn't hedge: he will have no choice. I call the shots. I call all the shots. He doesn't call the shots. And just recently, after Israel struck Beirut suburbs targeting Hezbollah, a move that put the tentative Iran framework deal at risk, Trump told Axios that Netanyahu has no FNG judgment when it comes to ending the war. There's also reporting from the Times of Israel about a moment that almost derailed everything entirely. Netanyahu reportedly called off a major Iran strike, while aircraft were already being prepared for takeoff. After Trump warned that Israel would be on its own if it proceeded. The decision caused, quote, considerable confusion within Israel's military high command. Trump reportedly added that 5 regional countries involved in mediation had asked him to pressure Netanyahu into halting strikes and moving forward with the deal, and a U.S. official told Axios that the daylight between the two leaders reflects their genuinely diverging political interests. So what's actually in this U.S. Iran agreement? According to The Hill, the Trump administration reached a preliminary deal with Iran that it says would reopen the Strait of Hormuz, a move meant to ease the energy crisis that's driven up prices. Importantly, Iran says the deal would end fighting in all parts of the war, including the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, which had been one of the biggest sticking points and a major source of friction between Trump and Netanyahu. This also fits a pattern we've seen building for weeks. Back on June 9, Al Jazeera reported that Trump had told Netanyahu, via phone call, to end the war in Gaza and stop talk of an attack on Iran, and in that same call, Netanyahu reportedly pushed back, telling Trump that Iran was stalling in negotiations and wasn't genuinely committed to any deal. So this isn't a sudden rupture, it's the culmination of weeks of growing tension finally coming to a head. Bottom line. Trump wants out of this war, and he's using real leverage, including blunt private language, to make that happen. Netanyahu, meanwhile, is heading into an election he's projected to lose, under pressure from a public that's losing faith in Washington's commitment, and now stuck with a deal his own officials are calling terrible. Whether Netanyahu actually defies Trump openly, or just quietly signals that Israel reserves its rights as Dan Shapiro predicted. That's the story to watch this week, especially with the formal signing expected Friday in Switzerland. If you want to stay on top of how this develops, subscribe, and let me know in the comments, do you think Netanyahu will actually push back, or fall in line?